We're going to be in the book of Esther this morning. And so if you're not super familiar with that, if you open your Bible to the middle, it's probably going to put you in or around Psalms or Proverbs. If you head back towards the beginning through Psalms and Job, then you will come to Esther. And we are going to do a quick summary of the whole book this morning. I'll just leave that there. You can interpret that however you would like. But I think this is going to be a really good lesson for all of us. But before we jump into that, I do want to say something that I failed to mention earlier. And that is, I want to give a big thank you to all the ones that came out and worked so hard yesterday. Eddie put some pictures on Facebook. So you may have gotten a glimpse of what they did, but a lot of pressure washing was going on, some painting was going on, some other stuff that they got done. And I am thankful for that. It looks awesome. Two things on that. One is, please be patient as we go through this process. There are going to be things that we might have to move classrooms here and there a little bit. There's going to be some mess. There's going to be things out of place, all that kind of stuff, as we work to just tighten things up as best we can and make this facility as good a reflection of our love for God as we possibly can. So please be patient with that as we work through that over the next little bit. But also please be engaged. Really soon we're going to present a comprehensive plan to you that will address how we're going to tackle all of this stuff and how much it's going to cost and how you're going to pay for it and all of those things. You like how I did that? How you're going to pay for it? Because the money tree we planted last year didn't take. I'm sorry. So we've got everything we need in our pockets, and so that's how we're going to handle that over the next couple of years. But we're going to need that, and we're also going to need people to show up and work. And I know that whenever there's a work day on the calendar, that may not always work for your schedule, and that's fine. If you will get with Eddie or Russell, they are heading up the building and grounds team. If you'll just let them know, hey, I can do this, I can do that, I'm interested in doing this. They can help you not only with getting plugged in with what needs to be done, but scheduling that in a way that works for you and your family so that you can still participate. So please get with them. They would very much appreciate your help. But if you get a chance to go down and look in some of the classrooms on your way out today, you'll see some work that's beginning to be done. And I emphasize beginning. We are just starting some of that stuff, so there's hardly anything down there that's complete yet. But it's all a good working process. But also, if you want to do that and then come back and go out this door and just walk around the building that way, you're going to see a lot of really great stuff that got cleaned up and looks super nice. And so thank you for all of you guys that plugged into that. It's coming along. And the reason that's important, and I struggle with this a lot because I don't want to overemphasize the building and miss our mission. We don't exist for this building. This building is a tool that we get to use for the glory of God and for His kingdom. But at the same time, if this, which is a representation of our ministry to this community, if it looks sloppy and messy, then that's going to be their interpretation of our ministry. And we definitely don't want that. So we've got to find that balance, and we're going to be working through that this year. All right, so going into the book of Esther this morning, we are finishing up our series on identity. We've been talking all month long about who it is that we are. We looked at our position in Christ, that we are adopted into His forever family, that because of the sacrifice Jesus made on the cross, we belong, we are loved, and all of those amazing things. And then we looked at our personalities and talked about how our personalities are different. They're tied to our gifts and abilities. And God uniquely and wonderfully designed those in each and every one of us so that we have something to bring to the table for the kingdom for His sake. So then last week we talked a little bit about what it means to live on purpose. How do you identify why you exist and why we're here as a people? And hopefully you've gotten a hold of the idea that we exist for His glory. It's not just about working a job and having a family and looking forward to retirement and how much stuff can I accumulate. Those are all fine things. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. But that can't be the center of our existence. The center of our existence is to honor and glorify Him. And when we make that realization, when we come to that place, then it can change the way we live at home, the way we live at work, and the way we interact within our community, which is where we're going today. My hope is that by the time we're done today, that you will be encouraged, that you will feel empowered, that you will recognize that God gave the world a gift in you. And He created you, He designed you, and all of that, and then He placed you. Remember we talked about last week that even the time and place of our birth was designed by God. Like He did all of that so you could be right here, right now, but not just for one moment of truth like we're going to look at with Esther. We're going to look at one place in her life where she really came through. But I truly believe that for each and every one of us, there's a moment of truth every day. There's a conversation. There's an act of kindness. There's a place that God has put us that in every day of our life, if we surrender those days to Him, then we can actually do amazing things for God in small ways. So then the question I have for you is, what does it mean to be a hero? What do you think of when you think of the word hero? Is it the typical stuff, a doctor, firefighter, nurse, paramedic, police officer? Is it somebody wearing the cape? Is it the person that shows up right in the nick of time? For some reason, the time, there it goes, okay. Is it all of that stuff, or could it be something different? Could it be that heroes are a lot more mundane and a lot less super than we normally think of them? Could it be that you're a hero? Now, I understand in the biblical context, when we think about that, we've got to come to the place where we recognize that the central character and the main hero in God's plan of redemption for the world and all that is, of course, Jesus Christ. But something else we see in Scripture is that over and over again, God kind of taps on the shoulder of His people, and He gives us a moment of truth. He gives us a place in the world where we, for someone on that day, get to be a hero. It might be for your child because you scoop them up and you hold them. It might be for a coworker because just the right moment, you look them in the eye and you ask how they're doing. And in a moment of vulnerability, they tell you how they're really doing, and you listen. And we've all had that experience where someone's asked how we're doing, and we tell them the truth, and they don't know how to handle it, and so they just kind of, oh, that wasn't what I was expecting, so I'm going to go on with my life. So imagine then if you're at work or teens, if you're at school, and how are you doing today? And the person answers honestly, and you stop your day, and you listen to them. You check out of everything else you had going on, and you engage with them in that moment. Or what if it's someone that through the conversation or through experience, observation, whatever, you see that they have a need, and instead of just passing by like everybody else has done in their life and in their day, you or I stop and we meet that need and we help. We give godly advice instead of the talk show advice. We forgive people who hurt us. We lend and don't expect to give it back. We serve above and beyond, and we do it joyfully instead of frustrated and begrudgingly. And what if we just were the heroes that God called us to be in everyday life for people right when they needed us to? So what we're going to be looking at today, now, Esther does that, and like I said, it's in a major and significant and life-altering way, but I believe that there are times every day that God gives us a similar opportunity to not maybe change the world, but to change somebody's world. And I want us to seize those opportunities. But there's just no really good way to jump into this without looking at the whole story. And so we're going to do that as quickly as we can. We're going to look at the whole story of what God does in the book of Esther. And then I'm going to give you just 4 things that we can learn from that. And then some direct application if we have time. If we're done by, like, say, 2 or 3 o'clock by that point, then I'll give you that part. If not, then we'll save it for next time. So in order to get into the story, we're just going to go to Esther 1:1 and start there. And forgive me. I'm going to be honest. I've been trying to hide this, and I'm just going to come clean and be honest with you. My eyes are getting worse, and I need new glasses. And so you're going to notice me do this more and more. So that's why I'm going to get it fixed, but I'm just going to go ahead and come clean. I've been trying to hide it, and I'm just feeling like, now, that's just not right. I need to be open with you about what's going on in my life. So I'm struggling with that right now. I'm getting old. Not that old. I've seen your glasses, and that's not going to help me. Thank the Lord. But I do need a little bit stronger prescription, so bear with me on that if you would. So Esther 1:1. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes. The Xerxes who reigned over 127 provinces stretching from India to Cush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the city of Susa. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of the nobles and the officials, the military leaders of Persia and Media. The princes and the nobles in the province were all present. So we're told in the beginning that the king's doing what kings like to do. He's throwing this big party. In a minute, we're going to look a little bit more of what that party looked like. But for right now, he's throwing a big party, and he's inviting all the important people in the kingdom. To give you an idea of what their kingdom looked like, this is what they're describing. So everything is said from India to what he called Cush, which would be Egypt. Right there in the middle, you see a red city that is called Shushan. That's another word for Susa. That's the city where this is all taking place. And then to the far left, over by the called the Great Sea or the Mediterranean Sea, you see Jerusalem, Samaria. That's where the people of Israel are. So in history, where we are is the time that's called the captivity. The great captivity has ended. God's people were being disobedient for a long time. God said, if you don't repent and turn back to me, bad things are going to happen. You're going to go into captivity. They didn't listen, so into captivity they went. 70 years worth. And then it ended. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah recount the lives of the people that began to go back to Israel and rebuild. In Ezra, they rebuild the temple. In Nehemiah, they rebuild the wall. And life continues on. But for some reason, or maybe for a lot of reasons, there are many Jews that decide to not go home. Esther, her cousin Mordecai, and some others that we're going to read about are Jews that decided to stay here instead of going home. And so picking up in verse 4, it says, for a full 180 days he displayed his vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. And when these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in an enclosed garden of the king's palace for all of the people, from the least to the greatest, who were in the citadel of Susa. So he wanted to celebrate big time. He's 3 years into his reign. Things are feeling good. He's feeling like he's got a lot of money to blow. Must have been nice. And so he has a 6-month-long party. If you didn't calculate it that fast, 180 days is 6 months. So for 6 days, probably not continuously, but over 6 days, he parties it up good. And then at the end of that, he has another banquet where he invites everybody to come over. And then all of my military friends would like this part, picking up in verse 8. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink his own way, which means as much as he wanted. For the king instructed the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. So not only do you have this huge party going on for a long time with an even bigger party to blow it all up at the end, the king decides to get generous and he says, hey, drink all you want. We'll make more. It's okay. Drink it all. Drink every bit. And then you can see things going downhill from there, right? Yes, because on the 7th day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits, that means when he was drunk, for those of you that are still working on biblical interpretation, that's a simple one for you. He was tanked. And when he had a really bad idea. That was that he commanded his eunuchs in verse 11 to bring before him Queen Vashti wearing her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and the nobles and for his loyals to look at. So everybody's drinking a whole lot. They're partying. They're all feeling good. The queen had her own party. The king didn't like that, apparently. He had shown off everything else. And so he decided, I've got one last thing that I can impress everyone with. So he wants to bring out his queen and show her off. And she made a decision that probably a lot of you would have made. I'm not going to go out there and pray around in front of your drunk friends. It's not happening. So then the king goes from dumb to dumber. And he pulls all of his nobles aside and says, look, I don't feel good about this. What should I do? And they all put their heads together and say, well, if you let your wife get away with this kind of stuff, just imagine what's going to happen all through the kingdom as all the women think they don't have to listen to their husbands anymore. I mean, obviously it's going to just descend into utter chaos and ruin. And being the pig that he was, he agreed with them. And so he just takes Vashti and just casts her aside. Like, I don't need you anymore. You're not good for me. You go on a little bit, and in chapter 2, we're told that he calms down a little bit. He gets his senses again. He probably starts getting a little bit lonely and decides, hey, I need another queen. And so he pulls those same nobles together and says, hey, what do we do now? What are we going to do about this? And so they come up with another idea that he really likes, and that is to have a royal beauty pageant. This is like Miss Persian Empire or whatever. And so they say, hey, let's go all throughout the empire and let's round up all the really pretty women and let's bring them to you, single, of course, virgins. Let's get them all together in the palace and give them beauty treatments for a year. And then at the end of that year, you can go through and pick the one that you like the best, and she'll be your wife. King being who he is, he really likes this idea, and so he signs up and says, let's get going. I can hardly wait. Verse 7, we're introduced to the star. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This girl, who was also known as Esther, was lovely in form and in feature. Mordecai had taken her in as his own daughter when her mother and father died. So Mordecai's got this cousin who's lost her parents, and he's brought her into the house, and he's raised her, and we're told right off the bat she's a knockout. She is just beautiful. And as the story unfolds, what you see about her is that not only is she beautiful on the outside, but she's beautiful in her character. Like everybody she encounters just loves her and adores her. They listen to the things that she says. You also see a few encounters where she takes advice from others and then she puts it into play. So she's got beauty, she's got wisdom, she's got charisma, like all this stuff. And it doesn't take all that long for the king to pick up on that. And so she wins the beauty contest and becomes the new queen. Yay! Way to go, Esther. And then we're told, as chapter 2 begins to wind down, that Mordecai, her cousin, who's staying close to her, because he's still that father figure in her life, and he wants to keep an eye on her. So he's staying close, and in staying close to her, he overhears something at the gates, and that is that there's a plot to assassinate the king. So he goes to Esther and he lets her know about the plot, and she immediately relays that to her husband, saving his life. And at this point, you would expect, like, the next thing is that Mordecai would be rewarded for that, but he's not. Instead, there's a very intentional transition, and that is the villain comes in, because you got to have a bad guy in a good story, right? So in comes the guy, the music turns dark. If it was an old Western, this would be the guy in the black cowboy hat, right? This guy comes in, and he's the guy that's going to cause problems. But I also want you to notice something else that happens here. This is beginning of chapter 3. After all this stuff has happened, it says, after all these events, King Xerxes honors Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all the nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt before him and paid honor to him, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. Text, and here's one of the things that I want to just pause and talk with you about for a minute. And that is that there are a lot of times that when we look at things from our perspective, it not only seems like God's not doing anything, which we're going to talk more about that in a minute, but it also seems like it's the bad guy that's getting ahead. It's the person who's cheating. It's the one who doesn't have integrity. It's the one who's not doing the right thing, who seems to be getting ahead. I mean, you look at it in this perspective. Esther didn't do anything except be born into the world as a beautiful woman. And because of that, she gets drafted into the king's harem completely against her will. She wins the contest and becomes queen, but we don't have any indication at this point. Do they love each other? Is this a good thing? Did it turn out okay? Or is she basically just a sex slave? Like, we don't know. All we know is that she didn't have a choice going into all of this. And then Mordecai comes alongside her. He tries to protect her, watch over her as best he can, but all this stuff is out of his control. There's nothing he can do to stop any of this, but what he can do is come in with the information that says, hey, the king's in trouble. You need to do something. And the plot is foiled. The bad guys are killed. And you would think Mordecai would get elevated, but instead this guy Haman does. And this guy Haman is just bitter and rotten and nasty. We see that in what happens next, because you caught that last sentence, right? Like, everybody's commanded. You've got to bow down before Haman when Haman comes through, and everybody bows down except Mordecai. Mordecai, I picture him, he's like over in the corner with his arms crossed, just like giving stank face. Right? Hey, I know what you're about, dude. I'm not doing it. And somehow he gets away with it. Somehow God protects him and nothing bad happens to him. But day after day this is going on, and Haman's getting more and more and more angry. And instead of lashing out at Mordecai, he comes up with this whole plot that I'm just going to have all of the Jews exterminated. And so again, if you go back to the map, there's this vast empire. We're told 127 different provinces here. Probably millions of people. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Jews. And Haman gets mad at one of them. And he goes to the king and somehow sells him this idea that on a certain day, at a certain time, people are going to take up their swords, they're going to take up their arms, and they're just going to wipe out all of the Jews. Just kill them all. Let's just not put up with them and their stuff anymore and wipe them off the face of the planet. And for some reason, the king goes, okay, let's do it. Because we're told he didn't know that his new queen was a Jew. She kept that back. Coming into chapter 4, as you can imagine, when that news reaches people, there's a lot of mourning, there's a lot of crying, there's a lot of fear and anger and frustration. And so Esther hears about Mordecai, and he's got on sackcloth and ashes, and he's in a state of mourning, and so she wants to know what's going on. And so she sends word to him, and when he comes back, he basically says, hey, this is what's going on, and you're in a position to do something about it. And Esther's initial response is the same kind of response we all have, I think, initially in our moment of truth. When God comes to us and he says, hey, I'm going to do this thing through you, and it's bigger than what we expected. It's more than what we had bargained for. We tend to push back. No, I can't do that. Remember, Moses said, hey, I can't speak well. And the other prophets, I'm too young, and I don't have anything to say, and I don't know what to do, and they're not going to believe that I'm from you. I mean, we all on some level do that. Her reasoning actually was pretty compelling. He says, hey, Mordecai, I can't do that. Because the king has a law, and the law says that if you go before the king and he doesn't want to see you because he didn't invite you, he can just have you killed. It's a big deal. Apparently, he either had some super time management skills and he really didn't want to be bothered, or he just didn't like people, or whatever it was. I mean, I tried this in the office. Ellen just refuses to kill people that knock on my door, so it hasn't gone very far for me. But I guess if I was the king of Persia, it'd be a different story, whatever. But for whatever reason, he didn't want to be bothered. Like, if you go in there, you knock on the door, he didn't ask for it, you're just done. And then she says, not only that, now remember, she's one of many wives. And this isn't a traditional household like we would picture where they're sharing a house together, sharing a bed together every night. She has her own palace, her own place, and she comes over when she's called. And then unfortunately there are other women that come over when they're called. She's one of a group here, a horrible way to have to live. But the next thing that she says, going along with that, is he hasn't even called for me in 30 days. So the average person can't just go in, even me, Mordecai, I can't just barge in unannounced, and I'm not even sure if he would want to see me because he hasn't called for me in 30 days. All the stuff that was going so well in our relationship, it's gone. Maybe. But Mordecai's not having it. The message comes to him, and he hears that, and he writes back to her, and this is the message that he sends. This is going to chapter 4, picking up with verse 13. He, meaning Mordecai, sent this back to her. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to this royal position for such a time as this. Essentially, he's saying a couple of things to her, and one of the things that's interesting about this is the first little glimpse that we have of any kind of spirituality, any kind of faith, any kind of acknowledgement of God at all. In fact, there have been scholars and there have been some pretty famous thinkers in the Christian world that have really wanted to remove Esther from the Bible because there's no overt mention of God. There is no overt mention of prayer. There's no listing of prayers. None of that stuff. Even Esther, up to this point, has been hiding the fact that she's a Jew. But when Mordecai hears that she doesn't want to step in and save her people, he basically says two things. One is, and I believe he's referring to God here, God will deliver his people. Somewhere in the recesses of Mordecai's mind, he remembered the stories that he had grown up on, because passing down their heritage was an important thing to the Jews during this time. And so they passed down those stories of God's deliverance from Egypt, of God's deliverance in the land of Canaan, of God's walking with them, guiding them, protecting them, all of that stuff. And so he says, this has been tried before, and God has stood up and defended his people. Deliverance will come from somewhere. And maybe, just maybe, Esther, everything in your life has been leading to this moment. And for a guy that has remained silent about God, Mordecai seems to have this amazing grasp of God's sovereignty and power. Maybe the circumstances of your birth, maybe the circumstances of where the kingdom is, maybe all of that stuff has been pushing you to this moment, right here, right now, to be used of God. And I truly believe, guys, that there are moments like that woven all through our lives. Conversations, moments to act on, time at home with our family, chances we have in the office or at school, opportunities all around us within this community. And it's not an accident that this church sits on this corner. If you're not familiar with our history, we started out on the bank of a lake that is no longer there. The lake, everything's gone. It's a housing development now. It was 100 years ago. And then we moved out onto 98. We were on 98 for a while, but they ran into a parking problem. And then this plot of land came open. And sometime in the 70s, ground was broken here. And this sanctuary began to be erected. And the church moved here. And it doesn't seem like all that significant of a thing until you start trying to tell people where our church is. And you tell almost anyone in Highland City that we're the church on Clubhouse in Yarborough with the playground out front. Oh, I know where that is. You've got a preschool. I know so-and-so that went there. Not to mention the county did a study on this road back 2 or 3 years ago when sadly a young man was hit and killed just outside here getting on the bus one day. And the study, they found somewhere around 14,000 cars a day drive right in front of this church. Don't tell me it's an accident that God would put a lighthouse here for him. It's not an accident that you have been brought in some way into this congregation. It's not an accident the place that you work, the house that you live in, all of that stuff. God uses all of those details for his honor, for his glory. And so Mordecai saying, hey, maybe every instance, every moment in your life has been pushing to this very moment so that you can be used for God. Esther agrees, and she gets on board at this point. And she says to Mordecai, listen, if we're going to do this, then we need to fast, and we need to pray, and we need to seek God's face. And so that's what they do. They spend 3 days fasting, and then she goes to the king. So she comes to the door, I imagine in my mind. She takes that breath, hoping everything's going to turn out all right. She goes through the door, knowing that those steps could be her last. That king could be like, you're done, I don't want to see your face again. Or he could receive her. To her surprise, I am sure, not only does he receive her, but he receives her well. Like, he is excited to see her. And so he calls her in and basically says, listen, I want to give you anything in the world that you want. Anything. Like, you ask for it, you get it right now. Up to half of my kingdom, it's yours. All you've got to do is ask for it. She said, I just have a real simple request. Can you and Haman come to a banquet at my house? Well, absolutely. We'll be there. So that night, there's a big feast, big dinner. Everything goes well. The king, again, pulls her aside and says, listen, hey, you're my favorite wife. I've tried that so many times with Priscilla. It gets me nowhere. I don't understand why, but it worked for the king. You're my favorite wife. Maybe it's because I can't say the next part, right? Just ask your request. Anything you want, up to half my kingdom, it's yours. She's like, I've already got everything you own. Like, that's not an offer for me. But for Esther, maybe it could have the king thought. So hey, I want to give you something. You name it, it is yours. Up to half of everything I have, I will give it to you. She said, I just want you to come to dinner again tomorrow night and bring Haman. So the king does. They part ways, go do their own thing. On Haman's way home, he passes Mordecai again and gets steak face, right? I mean, everything's been going so good up to this point. Like, the queen has invited him to 2 exclusive invitation-only dinners. Like, only him and the king. You think of this vast empire, probably millions of people, and she chose him, the queen and the king together, like the best power couple there was in the world at the time, and they want him to be a part of that. And so Haman is all excited, and then he passes Mordecai, gets steak face, and he just can't take it anymore. So he goes home and plots this whole idea. He's going to have these construction workers go out. They're going to stay up all night long and build this gallows that's 75 feet tall. And he's going to go into the king the next day and say, Mordecai's not bowing like he's supposed to. I want him dead. Everybody thinks it's a great idea. Haman's feeling really full of himself. So he goes in to see the king next morning, and he walks in. Sometimes when you walk in, you got your plan together. You're going to go into your boss, and you've got exactly what you want to say. And as soon as you walk in the door, what do they always do? I am so glad to see you. I've got something for you, right? And that's exactly what happens to Haman. The king looks at him. I am so glad you're here. I've got a question for you. What do you think I should do for someone that I really want to honor? Haman's going, oh, this is my chance. Who else could it be? I am the only one getting the invitation to these dinners. I am the highest in the nation other than the king and the queen. Obviously, he's going to honor me now, so I've got something for you, king. You see, what you should do, if I were you, your highness, what I would do is I would take a robe that I have worn, and I would have one of my nobles place that on the one you want to honor. And then I would take a horse that I have ridden, and I would take that one you want to honor with the robe on him, and I would put him on the horse. And then this is the coolest thing. Like, you're going to really like this, king, because this is going to show you really appreciate this person. You need to take one of your highest ranking nobles, and he needs to take the bridle of the horse and lead the horse with the guy on it through the town and tell everybody this is what the king does for the man he wants to honor. The king goes, oh, you are so smart. That's why I keep you around. This is a great idea. I want you to do that for Mordecai. There are certain moments in biblical history that I wish I could be there. One of the things I really hope will happen in heaven is that there will be like this viewing center where you can go in and just like call up things from the Bible and watch it happen. It may not be that way, but I'm kind of hoping. But then I'm also kind of hoping that the parts from my life are severely edited, but that's a different story. So what happens to Haman then is he has to do that. The king says, I love that idea. Go get Mordecai, put the robe on and put him on the horse, and lead him through the city, telling everybody this is what the king does for someone he wants to honor. As you can see, Haman's day didn't start off all that well. But all day long, he's like, well, I've got the banquet tonight. That's going to be awesome. Like twice in a row, I've been invited to these exclusive invitation-only banquets. Tonight, it's all going to be worth it. He goes to the banquet that night, tries to just shake off all the stuff that happened that day, has a great dinner. Like, it's lavish. It's great. Everything goes well. Things kind of die down at the dinner table, and the king leans over to Esther again and says, listen, ask anything from me. It's yours. I'm serious. Like anything you want, it's yours. Up to half of my kingdom. I'll have somebody come in, we'll write up the contract. It's yours right now. What do you want? And this time Esther tells him what it's really all about. She says, I have a simple request. It's very small. I just want my life. I want to live. The king's, knocked back, like, what are you talking about? What's going on? And so the queen begins to fill him in. Like, the plan that Haman has to wipe out the Jewish people, those are my people. And so if you wipe them out, you're wiping out my entire family, my entire heritage, and that means me too. And you've got to kill me. I'm going to die. My life is in danger. And the king is just angered and enraged. He storms out of the room. And while he does, Haman finally puts it all together, right? Like, I am in trouble right now. This has gone horribly out of control. I've got to do something. And so in an act of desperation, he tries to just plead with Esther. But as he does, he falls right on top of her. And of course, that is right when the king walks in. And so now the king's like, are you serious? Like, first you're trying to kill my wife, and now you're literally jumping on her in front of me. Didn't end well for Haman. He died. He was hung on the gallows that was intended for Mordecai. All of his land was transferred to Esther and to Mordecai, and they all live happily ever after. And here's some things that we can learn from their story. I'm adapting these from notes that J.D. Greer, who is the president of Southern Baptist Convention right now, wrote on Esther. And the first thing is just this: God can use anybody. And we see that woven all through this story, right? You've got Mordecai, who's the guy that's a little bit rebellious, but yet he's got all of this wisdom. He is gracious and loving enough to take this cousin who's orphaned into his home, to raise her as his daughter, to care for her and to watch after her, and to do all of that stuff. It really seems like a pretty amazing guy. And then you've got this young woman that he has raised, Esther, who the very first thing we're told again is just that she's beautiful, but you see all kinds of wisdom and courage in her. She must have a lot of inward character because people just are drawn to her and seem to be infatuated with her in a good way, and so everything around her just seems to be positive. But she's in this whole position that's out of her control, right? She comes into the world somehow orphaned. She's in a place where her people just a couple of decades before this were severely being oppressed, and now she's drafted into this beauty contest, and all of that is against her will, and it may or may not have been something she actually wanted to be a part of. And yet God used her. And then we have these ungodly, selfish characters like the king and Haman and the nobles and the advisors. And yet God uses every single one of them to accomplish his plan. Realize as a people is that God can and will use us in spite of us. I've been trying all month long to kind of pump you up and encourage you and to put these pictures in your mind, like this amazing, all-powerful, all-knowing, self-sustaining God somehow looked down from eternity and planned you. He crafted you. He designed you. And then he spoke you into existence for this world. And I recognize that in saying all of that, the problem is that we've got all these good things that God gave us, but they're all tainted by sin. And so wrapped into all of those really good things is selfishness and pride and sometimes angers that are out of control and greed and lust and all of that. And yet God looks at us in spite of all of that stuff and says, I still have a plan for you. And in fact, he told Paul, it's not really, and this is good, y'all, it is not really in spite of, not so much in spite of as maybe through our weaknesses that God calls us. And he said to Paul, in your weakness, people see my strength. That's why I love the honesty of the characters when God calls them like, hey, I can't speak. If God would have shown up in a burning bush or an angel or something like that when I was in high school and had said, hey, one day you're going to be a pastor, I'd been like, hey, I can't do that. I can't speak in front of a crowd. I can't lead people. And some of you might say, yeah, keep working on that because we agree. But God had a plan, and God's plan was to work through those weaknesses in me because through my weaknesses we see him as strong. One of the things Paul says over and over again is it's not because I was smart, it's not because I was eloquent, it's not because I had it all together that God has done these things into me. Paul says over and over again, it's because of God's strength, God's goodness, because God can and God will and God does use anyone. It's about being available. Yeah. Next thing that we learn from this is that God is working Even before we recognize he's working, he's at work. Many times when we think he's not doing anything at all, God's already at work. He's already got a plan. He's already got these things that he's working through. And so if you picture in your mind that moment where Esther is standing there and there's the entryway into the king's court and there's a curtain or a door or a guard or something, and she's there and she's trying to get herself psyched up and pumped up. And what I would imagine in my mind is that as she crosses the threshold and walks in there, somewhere along the line, she was thinking, I hope God does something. From her human perspective, and that's where we live, right? And we walk into those moments and we say, I hope God does something. I hope God does something to care for my family. I hope God does something to heal. I hope God does something to provide the way, whatever it may be. I hope in this moment God does something. But she had no way of knowing that if you rewind the video back, you see God's handiwork through all of this. That her parents would come together and have her as a child, and God would work through that to give her the beauty and the intellect and the courage and all of that stuff that she needed. But not only that, that God would then position Mordecai and Haman and these nobles and even Xerxes all in the place that he wanted them to be so that this story would unravel and accomplish his glory. Before you and I even know that there's a need, God is at work. Now, it doesn't always unfold the way we want it to, but it will always, I can guarantee you, unfold the way he wants it to. This week, as I was doing some research, I came across an amazing story of a missionary. Total opposite of one of my favorites. One of my favorites is Adoniram Judson. You guys have heard me talk about him before. One of the things I admire about him is that he went onto the mission field in Burma. First American there to be a missionary. Probably first missionary ever to be there. And he translated the Bible into their language for them. He did amazing things. But I think it took him over a decade to see the first person come to Christ. A lot of churches would have done fire to pastor way before then. But he sticks in there and he pushes through, and a huge revival sweeps through the Burmese people because of the work that Adoniram did. So now, counter to that, opposite of that, the story that I was reading this week, this missionary goes, he thinks his desire is to be the first missionary to go and to speak to this people group. And so he goes in and he builds relationships with them, and they invite him to this big banquet. And the big banquet is around Christmas. And so when he gets the opportunity at the banquet, he shares with them, and he shares the Christmas story. Best that he can. He tells this whole story about Jesus and how he was born and his love for us and the death, burial, resurrection, all of that stuff. And the people listen really politely. And then at the end, someone speaks up and they say, hey, thanks. Thanks for sharing that story. But we've heard it before. And actually, we believe it. And the reason we asked you here is because we need to know what to do next. The missionary, as you can imagine, a little taken aback by that. Like, that's not what he was expecting. And so he's excited, but all these questions are going on, right? So he's like, well, wait, back up for a minute and tell me what you're talking about. And so they say, hey, 2 years ago, somebody came through and they told us that story, and we believe the story. They also left us these Bibles, and we've been reading these Bibles, and we believe the story, and we believe the Bibles. We believe in Jesus. We want to follow him. What do we do now? The guy's like, I don't believe this. He's like, okay, wait. One more question. We'll start planning. We'll put it together. How many people do I need to plan? Like, he's thinking classes. You know, that's how we do everything in America, right? You got to put them into a class and do all this stuff. So how do I make that work? Like how many people are we talking here? Only about 200. So before this missionary went to the place, God sent someone else, and he sent someone else with a message, and the people received the message, and they understood it, and they believed it, and God was already working as the other guy was preparing to get there, and as he comes in, it changes the whole dynamic of what he's trying to do. And I tell you guys, if there were moments where we could pull back the curtain, what we would see is that God is working all around us. All around us. Our decisions don't stop God's work. Our decisions don't slow down God's work. The decisions we make determine whether or not we get to be a part of what God is doing. He's already at work. He's got a plan that started before he even spoke anything into existence. And he's been working it out little by little all through culminating to his goal and what he wants to accomplish. And so because of that, you and I need to be willing to risk everything for the kingdom. That's what Esther had to do, right? Esther was called on to risk her life, to walk into that room not knowing how it was going to turn out, to put it all on the line for what she believed. One of the ways that we are overly spoiled here in America, and one of the reasons why we struggle in the American church to really be on fire for God, is because we have it so easy. Our lives are not threatened because of what we believe, not on a large scale. We don't typically lose friends or lose jobs or suffer any kind of discomfort because of what we believe. And so, spiritually speaking, we become fat and lazy and overly focused on ourselves and our comforts. It's not that way all over the world. And so one of the things that we learn from Esther in her experience is that we might as well just risk it all for the kingdom. One of the things that the Bible does say is sure to happen for us, is that we are sure to die one day. It may not be tomorrow. It might be decades from now. It might be 40 or 50 years from now. But there's a point in the Bible says one moment, one day for each and every one of us to die. And so if that's a given, what is it that we're trying to hold on to? What is it that we're trying to protect? If Jesus said, if you hold on to this life, in this life, you will lose it. But if you give it up for me, you will actually gain it for eternity. Then why do we hold on to and cling to anything from this world? Why can't we, and I mean we because I need to work on it too, why can't we risk it all for the kingdom? I tell you, if we could, we would be truly dangerous. Jim Elliot lived his life that way. He's a missionary you guys have heard me speak about before. And one of the things that he wrote before his death is, he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. He or she is no fool to give up what you cannot keep in order to gain what you cannot lose. When he wrote those words, he probably didn't know he was going to risk and lay down his life for his Savior, but he did. And as tragic as his death was for his family, a revival broke out in that South American area because of his and 4 other missionaries' sacrifice. But not only that, young men and young women all over college campuses in America began to leave behind college or change majors to go into ministry in the mission field and spread out all over the world because someone risked it all for God. What would happen in your family? What would happen in this church? What would happen in our workplaces and school places if we just risked it all for the kingdom? If we didn't try to hold it back for us, if we risked difficult conversations, if we risked getting on a plane and going to another place, if we risked hosting a Chinese student in our home, if we risked tutoring a student at the preschool or at the school down the street, if we really laid it all down and risked it for Him, what would happen? Well, one thing is that we can meet the urgent needs that are all around us. Because when all we do is focus on our own comfort, when all we do is focus on having a worship service, doing it in a beautiful building, and all of those things, we close our eyes to the need that is all around us. Here's some examples. On average, about 500,000 babies are aborted in the U.S. every year. 500,000. That's the low end, by the way. On average, every day, somewhere in the world or across the world, 25,000 children die from starvation and preventable disease. There are more slaves in the world right now than there ever have been in the history of the world altogether. One of the great things about the current generation is that they are getting mobilized for those kinds of things. They're trying to build awareness for the slave trade. They're trying to build awareness for hunger and our need to be good stewards with this planet and all of those things. And that is great. Like, we need that awareness. We need to learn as believers how to integrate that into our faith, and into our worship services so that we can be motivated to go and physically do something to meet these needs. But I tell you what, we miss the mark if all we do is try to meet those physical needs and we're not moved by the fact that right now on this planet, somewhere around 3 billion with a B, 3 billion people live in places where they do not have access to the gospel. About 3 billion people who live in villages and in cities and in homes where they don't have a church like us that's just down the street. Now, you stand in our parking lot and you throw a rock in any direction, you're probably going to bounce it off a church van, or a deacon's head. You just can't miss them in this area. But there are a lot, preferably the deacon's head. But there are a lot of places in this world where that is not true. They've never heard the gospel. They have never known a Christian. And then compound that with, in our country, there are a whole lot of people that have heard the message, but it's been drowned out by the things that people like you and I, who want to be genuine Christ followers but come up short, have done to them. And so you've got people that have not and will not, unless someone intervenes, hear the gospel. And then you've got people that have heard it, but they don't want any part of it because of what they've seen in the church. And into that mix on a daily basis, God has called us as His people to just live our lives. He's called us to walk into those places and just have conversations with people, to love people, to pray with them, to pray for them, to do good things, to be people, men and women of integrity, to sacrifice, to be patient. And just doing those basic things of Christianity. And sometimes it just blows me away when I step back and think, wait, we spend all this time learning all of this knowledge about the Bible. We spend all this time learning how to share our faith. We spend all this time learning how to be good leaders. And sometimes we compartmentalize that so much that we only do any of that stuff here. And then we go out where actually the people are who need to hear Christ. And then we go in those places just focused on our job and just focused on our life and what we want to accomplish, that sometimes we go weeks or days or maybe even months without doing anything to positively impact someone for Christ. What I'm asking you to do is to just say yes to God today and to every day. So let the Holy Spirit come alongside you like Mordecai did Esther and just say, hey, maybe God put you here for this moment. Maybe you need to pause and have this conversation with this person instead of rushing by them. Maybe you need to work harder and let people see your integrity through your work and your excellence at your job. Maybe you need to clock in and clock out when you're really supposed to clock in and clock out. Maybe you need to give a word of encouragement. Maybe you need to unplug from the world a little bit and spend some more time investing in your kids or your grandkids. Give you take some time with your spouse and look them in the eye and say, I do love you. You are my favorite spouse. Nobody else in the world like you. I give you half of everything I have. I can fit it all in this bag, but it's yours. And it's just a lot of simple and everyday ways that we can invest the gospel into people's lives if we'll just say yes. Today, let's do that. Let's say yes together. God, we are thankful for Esther and for Mordecai and for the lives that they lived and the way that they allowed you to use them. And God, I just pray that you would help us on a daily basis to recognize the places where we can step in and represent you. And I pray that you would help us to do that with joy. I pray that we would be excited about the things that you call us to do. Whether it's swinging a hammer or helping a kid with their math homework or walking someone home. Speaking a word of encouragement or just being still and quiet and listening to someone else's life and what's going on for them. God, I pray that you would use us in those moments, that you would help us to recognize them and to just step into them. I pray that your Holy Spirit would guide us. You would give us wisdom in those moments, and you would help us to honor you in everything. As this song says, God, I pray that we would do that without fear. And with the same kind of courage that Esther did, that we would approach our lives, in a sense, almost recklessly laying them before you and not being afraid of the things that we might lose, not being afraid of rejection, not being afraid of any cost that we might absorb, but seeing all of that as a privilege of being able to honor you. Father, there are probably a whole lot of things that are going on in the lives of your people today that we've not talked about. And I just pray that your Holy Spirit would continue to minister in those areas. We pray for those from our church that are struggling with different illnesses now. And I pray that you would help us to encourage them and to pray for them and to walk through this time with them. For someone that's trying to figure out how to pay the bills, for someone who's trying to figure out how to salvage a relationship, for someone who doesn't know how to reconnect with their kids. We just pray, Father, that you would speak into those moments right now, and that you would bring healing, and that you would increase faith, and that you would draw us closer to you, only to sling us out of this place to make a difference for you. In your name we pray. Amen.